My son's high school guidance counselor deliberately sabotaged his college recommendation letters because I refused to donate $25,000 to her personal scholarship fund. The first rejection email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports over my second cup of Starbucks Pike Place, Harvard. I stared at the subject line for a full minute before opening it, my stomach already twisting into knots. We regret to inform you. The words blurred together as my coffee went cold. By the following Monday, the pattern was undeniable. Yale arrived Wednesday, Princeton on Friday, MIT the next Tuesday. Each rejection felt like another punch to the gut, but it was the systematic timing that made my finance-trained brain start connecting dots. These weren't the random decision releases most families experienced over weeks. These were methodical eliminations, arriving with clockwork precision that felt orchestrated. Nicholas wouldn't be home from lacrosse practice for another hour. My 17-year-old son had maintained a 4.0 GPA since freshman year, scored 1,580 on his SAT, served as student council president, and spent 3 years volunteering at the Westfield Community Food Bank. His college counselor, Mrs. Alexandra Huntington, had repeatedly assured us he was a strong candidate for top-tier universities. She'd been handling college placements at Westfield Academy for 15 years, constantly reminding parents about her impressive track record. But something about her confidence now felt different, calculated. When she called that afternoon, her voice carried that perfectly practiced tone of manufactured sympathy that expensive private school administrators master like a second language. She suggested we schedule an immediate meeting to discuss realistic recalibration and alternative pathways forward. The phrasing made my skin crawl with its clinical detachment. My mind kept circling back to our conversation 4 months earlier, the one that had left me feeling vaguely dirty, but that I'd dismissed as just another entitled administrator pushing boundaries. The memory felt different now, more sinister in light of these systematic rejections. I should have trusted that instinct when it first raised red flags. The rejection from Columbia arrived that evening while Nicholas was upstairs, doing calculus homework, completely unaware that his carefully constructed future was crumbling around him. I sat in our Westfield kitchen, surrounded by acceptance letters from his friends' social media posts, trying to understand how a kid with perfect credentials could fail so spectacularly across the board. Updated, 5 rejections in 8 days. Felt orchestrated, not random. Mrs. Huntington's immediate availability for damage control seemed almost prepared. My finance background was screaming that something wasn't adding up. Anyone else's perfect kids getting mysteriously shut out this year? The November meeting had been Mrs. Huntington's idea, framed as strategic planning for our most accomplished students. Her office overlooked Westfield Academy's pristine campus, complete with the ridiculous $2 million library renovation that looked more like a Hamptons country club than a high school facility. She'd served actual tea in bone china cups while explaining how dramatically the college admissions landscape had evolved over recent years. The conversation started professionally enough. Nicholas's academic profile, his leadership activities, the importance of crafting compelling personal narratives that would distinguish him from thousands of other high-achieving applicants. She spoke knowledgeably about admissions trends, demographic considerations, and the increasing competitiveness at elite institutions. Everything felt routine until she shifted the conversation in a direction that made me uncomfortable. Traditional metrics had become baseline requirements, she explained, leaning forward with the conspiratorial air of someone sharing insider secrets. Grade point averages, standardized test scores, even impressive extracurricular profiles were simply entry tickets to consideration. The real differentiator came from having proper advocacy and established connections within the admissions ecosystem itself. That's when she introduced what she carefully termed her supplemental guidance services. For select families with exceptional students, she offered enhanced placement support through her network of educational consultants and former admissions professionals. The investment required was substantial, $25,000, but she explained this was payable to her independent consulting practice rather than through the school's official channels, allowing for more personalized and intensive support. She positioned this service as exclusive, reserved for students whose families understood the evolving realities of modern college admissions. The presentation was polished, professional, and completely inappropriate. The emphasis on secrecy troubled me, as did the separation from official school business and the way she framed her services as essential rather than optional. When I politely declined, explaining that I believed Nicholas's considerable merits should speak for themselves without additional financial investment, something shifted in her demeanor. Not dramatically. She was too experienced for obvious reactions, but enough that I noticed the temperature in the room drop several degrees. She'd assured me with a tight, professional smile that Nicholas would continue to receive her complete support, regardless of our family's decision about supplemental services. But the way she emphasized complete support carried undertones that made me uncomfortable then and absolutely terrified me now, sitting with a pile of rejection letters. The whole interaction had felt like a shakedown disguised as educational guidance, but I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. Wealthy private schools operated differently, I'd reasoned. Maybe this was just another example of how the other half lived, how connections and money smoothed paths that merit alone couldn't navigate. The rejections weren't random. They were surgical, targeting every single institution where Nicholas had interviewed exceptionally well, where his statistics exceeded median accepted student profiles, where admissions officers had specifically mentioned his compelling application materials during campus information sessions. All of them gone with methodical precision. Mrs. Huntington scheduled our emergency meeting for the following Monday morning. Her office felt different this time, colder, more clinical, like a doctor's office where you're about to receive terminal diagnosis. She had backup options prepared in neat manila folders, state schools, regional universities, perfectly respectable institutions that nonetheless represented a dramatic step down from what Nicholas had earned through 4 years of relentless academic dedication. Her explanation was masterful in its gaslighting precision. Competition had reached unprecedented levels this year, she explained with practiced authority. Ivy League institutions were prioritizing diversity initiatives and first-generation college students over traditional academic metrics. Nicholas's demographic profile, white, male, affluent suburban Connecticut, faced particularly challenging headwinds in the current admissions climate. She spoke with the unshakable confidence of someone who'd navigated these treacherous waters for years while I was just another stressed parent who didn't understand how the system really worked. Her explanation sounded reasonable, even sympathetic, but something about the timing and completeness of the failures felt wrong. But I understood systems better than she realized. 20 years in financial analysis had taught me to spot patterns, identify statistical anomalies, recognize when numbers didn't align with expected outcomes, and this felt like fraud, systematic and deliberate. That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of accepting her narrative and scrambling for backup schools, I hired Dr. Sarah Chen, an independent college consultant who specialized in application forensics and admissions strategy analysis. I wanted an objective professional assessment from someone with no connection to Westfield Academy or Mrs. Huntington's reputation. Dr. Chen's comprehensive review took nearly 2 weeks. When she called with her preliminary findings, her voice carried the careful weight of someone delivering devastating news to a patient. Nicholas's application materials were exceptional across every measurable dimension, she reported. His essays demonstrated genuine voice and compelling personal narrative. His teacher recommendations glowed with authentic enthusiasm and specific examples. His extracurricular profile showed sustained leadership development and meaningful community impact over multiple years. But Mrs. Huntington's counselor recommendation contained something Dr. Chen had encountered only twice before in her 15-year career: sophisticated linguistic sabotage disguised as professional educational assessment. The letter was filled with subtle negative coding that would signal red flags to experienced admissions officers while maintaining plausible neutrality if challenged. Phrases like "Nicholas demonstrates consistent academic performance" instead of "excels intellectually across disciplines," references to his traditional approach to student leadership rather than innovative problem-solving abilities. Most damaging was a carefully constructed paragraph describing his methodical adherence to established academic protocols that effectively coded him as lacking creativity, intellectual curiosity, or independent thinking. Dr. Chen explained that experienced admissions officers at competitive institutions were trained to recognize these sophisticated negative signals. They were subtle enough to torpedo an application while maintaining complete professional deniability on paper. It was character assassination disguised as educational evaluation, and Mrs. Huntington had wielded it with surgical precision against my son. The forensic analysis revealed additional disturbing patterns in the language choices, timing of submissions, and even the formatting of materials that suggested systematic sabotage rather than professional oversight. This wasn't incompetence or oversight. This was deliberate destruction of a young person's future, executed with the cold precision of someone who'd done it before. Armed with Dr. Chen's detailed forensic analysis, I consulted with Rebecca Martinez, an attorney who specialized in educational misconduct and institutional fraud. Within 3 weeks, we'd filed formal complaints with the Connecticut Department of Education, the Better Business Bureau, and contacted investigative journalists at both the Hartford Courant and the New Haven Register. What started as my individual case against Mrs. Huntington quickly expanded when other families began coming forward with disturbingly similar experiences. The pattern that emerged was elegant in its simplicity and horrifying in its scope across multiple years of graduating classes. Parents who'd paid Mrs. Huntington's supplemental consulting fees saw their children accepted to top-tier universities at remarkably high rates, often exceeding 90% success rates for Ivy League applications. Families who declined her services or couldn't afford the substantial fees watched their qualified children mysteriously fail to gain admission, despite credentials that should have guaranteed acceptance at multiple institutions. The Currents investigation, led by education reporter David Kim, revealed that Mrs. Huntington had been operating this elaborate scheme for at least 4 years, systematically affecting dozens of families and their children's futures. She'd maintained detailed spreadsheets tracking which parents had paid her fees, which had refused, and which students received positive versus negative recommendation letters accordingly. Her personal financial records, obtained through court discovery, showed consulting income that far exceeded her official school salary, nearly $180,000 in additional income over 3 years. This funded a lifestyle that included luxury European vacations, designer clothing purchases, lease payments on a BMW, and a second property investment in Martha's Vineyard that would have been impossible on her educator's salary. When initially confronted by reporters, Mrs. Huntington vehemently denied any wrongdoing, claiming her consulting work was entirely separate from her school responsibilities and that any correlation between payments and admissions outcomes was purely coincidental. But the evidence was overwhelming and meticulously documented. Email threads discussing specific students were cross-referenced with payment records showing exact dates and amounts. Calendar entries blocked time for special family consultations that aligned perfectly with fee collection schedules. Text messages with counselors at other private schools discussed strategies for handling difficult parents who wouldn't invest appropriately in their children's futures. The school board launched an immediate investigation when the media coverage intensified. Mrs. Huntington was suspended with pay pending a complete review of her practices and student outcomes over the previous 5 years, when the scope of her systematic misconduct became undeniable. She was terminated for cause, and her state counseling license was revoked permanently. Criminal charges followed within 6 months: wire fraud for using school email systems to facilitate her scheme, extortion for threatening students' futures unless parents paid fees, and breach of fiduciary duty for violating her professional obligations to act in students' best interests. Mrs. Huntington ultimately pled guilty to multiple fraud charges. In a plea bargain that included a 4-year federal prison sentence, $200,000 in restitution payments to affected families, and permanent prohibition from working in educational settings. More importantly for the families she'd victimized, the court mandated that all students who'd been sabotaged over the previous 3 years could resubmit college applications with corrected counselor recommendations. Nicholas took advantage of this opportunity, reapplying to his top choices with honest, supportive letters from Dr. Chen and his teachers who'd been horrified to learn about Mrs. Huntington's sabotage. The process was emotionally difficult, reopening wounds and hopes that had been systematically crushed, but necessary for his future. He was ultimately accepted to Northwestern University, Duke, and UC Berkeley, not Harvard or Yale, but excellent institutions where he's found his academic passion and personal calling. At Northwestern, he's thrived in their Medill School of Journalism, using his experience with educational corruption as the foundation for investigative reporting that's already won several collegiate awards. Nicholas has written extensively about admissions ethics and institutional accountability for the student newspaper and national publications. He speaks regularly at high school conferences about integrity in education and has become an advocate for transparency in college counseling practices. The experience taught our family that corruption often wears the most respectable masks and operates within systems we're taught to trust implicitly. Mrs. Huntington's 15-year tenure, her professional credentials, her position of institutional authority, none of it protected families from her willingness to exploit children's futures for personal financial gain. Sometimes the people we're supposed to trust most with our children's welfare are capable of the most devastating betrayals. But fighting back against corrupt systems, even when the personal cost feels overwhelming, can create meaningful change for future families who won't have to endure what we experienced. The case led to new Connecticut state legislation requiring disclosure of any financial relationships between school counselors and outside consulting services. Several other districts have implemented oversight protocols and audit procedures designed to prevent similar schemes from developing. Updated. Mrs. Huntington served 4 years and lost her career permanently. Nicholas found his calling in investigative journalism at Northwestern, using his experience to expose educational corruption nationwide. New state laws now protect families from similar schemes. Sometimes justice takes time, but it comes. Worth. Fighting corrupt systems even when the cost feels overwhelming? Would you risk your child's immediate opportunities to expose a counselor's corruption, knowing it might help future families, but could hurt your own kid's chances in the short term?